Thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and excitement on being here today. My name is Robin Anderson. I'm the Director of Programs and Communications at the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association. The Canadian Agricultural Safety Association celebrates the Canadian Agricultural Safety Week each year. Every year, CASA raises awareness about the importance of farm safety during this week, which happens in the third week of March. Resources focusing on emergency preparedness, mental health, health on the farm, women in agriculture, grain safety, and road and rail safety are all free to download from the AgSafetyWeek.ca website. In celebration of Egg Safety Week, Egg Safe ribbons are available in a physical format and a digital format. And these ribbons can be made to order on the campaign website as well. Also is the media kit. There is a social media guide, which is a great tool for any social media user. You can use the ideas from the guide, download images, cartoons, and graphics from the media kit, and tweet and post about your support. CASA is also making available its online courses for free for the month of March, and this also can be found at AgSafetyWeek.ca. And you can show your support by telling your friends and colleagues about Egg Safety Week, liking the CASA Facebook page, following CASA at Plant Farm Safety, and on Instagram. Sponsors and partners for Egg Safety Week 2025 include the Government of Canada through the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. Canadian Egg Safety Week is also supported by CN, Canadian Canola Growers Association, and Syngenta. So on to our forum. I am so pleased to welcome Dr. Andria Jones and Shelley Thompson to our forum, The Impact of Extreme Weather on Farmers' Mental Health and Resilience. I've had the privilege of knowing both Andria and Shelley for a while now, and I am so excited that they are able to be here today to talk about an issue that severely impacts our producers and our communities. Dr. Andria Jones has a very impressive resume. She holds his DMV and is a full professor of epidemiology in the Department of Population Medicine at the Ontario Veterinary College, University of Guelph. Andria has completed a certificate program in applied positive psychology, another in emotional intelligence, and as a certified resilience trainer. She has been awarded the Brigid Rivoire Award for Champions of Agricultural Mental Health and 2 Distinguished Professor Awards for Excellence and Innovation in Teaching. And those are so well deserved. Andria is a dynamo and an exciting presenter and just so passionate. And we're so happy you could be here today with us, Andria. And Rochelle Thompson, Shelley, is a Master of Science and is a 7th-generation farmer and volunteer firefighter in Hamilton, Ontario. Shelley is naturally passionate about research that works towards strengthening the mental health of farmers and connection within the agricultural communities. After completing a Master's of Science in Epidemiology, conducting the 2021 National Survey of Farmer Mental Health in Canada, Shelley is pursuing a PhD at Ontario Veterinary College at the University of Guelph, studying the mental health impacts of livestock lost to extreme weather, barn fires, pests or disease, and ways to better support farmers following these events. She is a young person with a passion for agriculture, and we are so lucky that you're here today, Shelley. Thank you so much. So Andrea and Shelley are going to present, and this will be followed by an opportunity for questions. The chat is open for questions, comments, and concerns throughout the presentation, and we'll be asking those questions and sharing those comments at the end. So welcome, Andrea and Shelley, and I am going to let you take it away, and thank you so much. We're really excited.
Thanks for inviting us. Thanks for having us. It's great to be here, Robin.
It's okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to talk about the impact of extreme weather on farmers' mental health and resilience. We're excited to be here and to share some of our recent research. So we are, hold on, here we go. We're coming to you from the University of Guelph, and before we get started, we'd like to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge that we benefit as uninvited guests on this land, as both the University of Guelph and my home farm are on the ancestral lands of the Attawandaron people in Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory, and on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. In 1817, only 25 years after the Between the Lakes Treaty was signed, my ancestors came from England and were settlers on the same land that I live on and continue to farm today. I imagine my ancestors 7 generations ago were amazed by how healthy and thriving the land and water was when they arrived. and that they likely didn't realize and recognize that the beautiful condition of the land was because of thousands of years of hard work and careful stewardship by the Indigenous peoples who live here. Today, we want to honor and respect the land, water, plants, animals, and Indigenous peoples of this region and all regions that we're coming from today, whose hard work has sustained our ancestors and the lives of many of us who live and work here and will continue to sustain generations to come. So you've already heard a little bit about us. Thank you, Robin, for that wonderful introduction. So we would like to start by learning a little bit more about you. And when you get the chance, please introduce yourself in the chat and say if you're a farmer, if you work with farmers, and if you have experience dealing with extreme weather events in farming. And I would love to read them while Andrea is presenting the first part of this forum. So at this point, I will hand it over to Andrea.
Excellent. Thank you, Shelley. So while you're introducing yourself in the chat, I'd also like you to consider, what has the planet done for you lately? And chances are the thoughts that are coming up in the minds of the people on this call today are rather varied. Perhaps you're thinking of the planet as providing a place to live or providing food and fresh water. Perhaps you thought of provision of spaces and places for recreation or for connection or for aesthetic beauty, like this photo here. And what, oh, I don't appear able to change thank you, to change the slide. And so there are so many different ways that the planet provides for us. And a team that I have the great pleasure of working with is called the Manufactured Ecosystems Team, and that's out of the University of Guelph. And what we have put together is that there's at least 22 different ways in which the planet provides for us. So 22 essential ecosystem services for human health and well-being. So 22 different ways that nature provides for us. And so, we have ecosystem services that provide for us, providing food and potable water and fuel. We have services that regulate our world, right? So regulate climate or regulate disease. We have what we call cultural services as well, things like providing identity. A lot of farmers, for example, identify with their land. A lot of Indigenous communities strongly identify with their land. Or we may have, again, recreation. We may have a connection to spirit or spirituality from the land as well. And then for the farmers that are in the room, perhaps you also thought of the earth as playing supporting roles in things like soil formation and cycling of different nutrients and primarily producing for us. And so our ecosystem services give us so much. And as humans, we've come to live and survive and thrive on earth as a result of those things. And the question remains to be asked, how long will these essential ecosystem services remain intact? So sadly, we're already seeing losses to several of those services through climate change. And sometimes when I say climate change, when I'm physically present in a room with people, it's almost like I can sense the energy in the room change a little bit. It's a very powerful term, and it has the ability to elicit strong reactions in people. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about today, was to say that climate change isn't new. If we could go to the next slide. Oftentimes farmers will say that to me, climate change isn't new. And I say, absolutely, it isn't new. It's a concept that's been discussed in the scientific written word since as early as 1896. This gentleman here, Swedish scientist Svante Arrhenius, he first predicted changes in atmospheric carbon dioxide levels that could substantially alter the surface temperature of the earth through, and he used the terms, the greenhouse effect. right? So unquestionably, climate change is not new. Next slide, please. And farmers farming through climate change also isn't new. They've been doing this for thousands of years, right? And that doesn't mean that climate change isn't something that we need to address, because we do, unquestionably. So, for example, in the next slide there, we've got these planetary boundaries. So if you're unfamiliar with this, that's no problem. There's 9 planetary boundaries that the Stockholm Resilience Center at Stockholm University has proposed. And they first proposed this back in 2009. And so, as has been described by those creators, the planetary boundaries are basically the safe limits within which the 9 critical processes that we need to live on a stable and resilient Earth can act. Right? So we don't have to worry about the specific details for this presentation, but we see things like biosphere integrity or land system change or freshwater use. And basically, if we're living within that center circle, that gray and green circle, things are okay. Humans can exert pressure on the Earth in things like climate change, and the Earth is generally able to regulate that and sort of bounce back from the pressures that we're applying to it. The issue arrives when we start to cross those planetary boundaries. And so back in 2009, we saw 3 planetary boundaries be crossed. In 2015, we crossed 4 of those planetary boundaries. And then in 2023, we'd actually crossed 6. And we're soon on our way to crossing a 7th planetary boundary. So we're moving beyond that safe limit of human pressure to the point where it's getting harder for the Earth to respond and to regulate. And so as a result of crossing those planetary boundaries, we're at a much higher risk of massive, large-scale, abrupt environmental changes, and in some cases, possibly irreversible environmental changes. So things like sea rise, measured in meters, right? That will affect where we can live and prosper. That sounded very Star Trek-like, but it works. Or where we'll have very unstable temperatures such that living there becomes uninhabitable. So if I could go to the next slide. The next question is, how will agriculture continue in the face of such big changes, right? How will agriculture, food production, food supply, food distribution, food security, and food sovereignty, how will they continue in the face of widespread climate change that we will or are facing more rapidly and more severely than in the past, because we're now crossing those planetary boundaries? So which of these ecosystem services will be further threatened or lost altogether? And then how is agriculture going to adapt? Next slide, please. So what do we already know about climate change and farming? In a recent study, the 2024 Farmers' Voice survey, we can go to the next slide. 75% of participating farmers reported that they had already seen a worrying impact from climate change. And 2/3 reported having already experienced losses in their farming revenue as a result of abnormal weather in the past 2 to 3 years. And so here in Canada, we've seen extreme weather events happen that have obviously severely impacted agriculture in the affected areas. So we've seen things depicted in these pictures here. We've seen flooding that has eroded soils and reduced soil fertility, has damaged or completely wiped out crops, has threatened livestock feed supplies, has threatened livestock health health and safety. Like we see, these photos are from Abbotsford, BC, with the 2021, the massive floods there. So, livestock health and safety was threatened. Human health and safety was threatened. There was destruction of barns and homes. So pretty major examples. Other examples that we've seen in Canada are extreme heat waves, heat domes, and droughts, which obviously affect agriculture in several ways as well. As we can see in the pictures here, soils being much drier, destroying crops, leaving little forage and feed for cattle, causing heat stress to livestock, and increasing their susceptibility to disease and death. Three of these examples are from Alberta and Ontario. And then in that top right photo, that's actually from Texas, where temperatures of 45 degrees Celsius cause massive die-offs of cattle. And then, of course, there's the risk of wildfires, like the one shown in BC. And then those are the obvious changes, right? Those ones are very, very hard to miss. And then there's also other changes that are more subtle, less noticeable. So warmer, wetter climates with more carbon dioxide will allow for many weeds and pests and fungi and parasites to expand their geographical range and move into areas where they previously hadn't been, and actually be able to establish themselves and thrive in these new areas. So this is just one example here on the far left. This is the brown marmorated stink bug. I know I saw more of these in my house in a city in Ontario this past summer. It's an invasive species. It's showing up in great numbers in new areas of Canada. I know when we were at AgX in BC, farmers shared with me that they saw lots of these stink bugs, and it attacked many plant species, soybean, corn, apples, peaches, berries, and more. Similarly, offland, in the center photograph here, warming water temperatures are allowing for the expansion of new invasive species in the water. So the picture there is the New Zealand mud snail. So very tiny. That's a penny shown for comparison. And that threatens Rocky Mountain sculpin fish, and which of course would interrupt the life cycles or affect life cycles in the water. And so those warming water temperatures are likely to shift the ranges and the life cycle timing of certain fish species, again, leading to ecosystem disruption and affecting seafood and production supply. And then on the far right, we also, this picture is to depict potential threats to food supply chains, right? So, it was just a few years ago in the early days of the COVID pandemic where we saw food chain disruption. And I know I'll always remember walking into grocery stores and seeing empty shelves. So with the increased frequency and severity of extreme weather events affecting food production, but it can also affect delivery routes, right? Shipping routes, major transportation waterways, transcontinental shipping routes. So all to say, unquestionably, further climate change will pose more extreme threats to agriculture, and that's going to disrupt our established ways of knowing and our established ways of farming and food production, and that's going to require adaptability and the ability to change. So if we can go, to the next slide. So the very, very good news, this is not all doom and gloom. One piece of good news is that farmers are not new to farming through disruption. Farmers have been farming through disruption for over 10,000 years since agriculture was established. Consider broad-scale uncertainties, economic collapses, wars, famines, changing weather, changing landscapes, changing approaches, changing technologies, changing world leaders who impose new types of challenges for eons, right? Farmers have demonstrated on the whole tremendous ability for massive adaptation. And so I firmly believe that will be the case here as well with climate change. And like with any serious threat, we have got to be fully prepared, and we've got to think through all of the issues with all of the key players, most especially farmers. And we've got to start doing that now. You know, yesterday would have been better, but the second best time is right now. And in order to do that, we have to attend to farmer mental health and well-being, because as we've been saying for at least the past decade now, sustainable agriculture requires sustainable farmers. And I'm sure we've been saying that for much longer than the last decade. So in the face of climate change, we require highly adaptive, healthy, and resilient farmers. But how well are Canadian farmers? And so this leads into some of the research that our group has done with amazing collaborators and colleagues, including CASA, that have looked at farmer mental health in Canada. And at this point, I believe I'm handing it over to Shelley to talk about this, as Shelley led a lot of this work in her master's degree and is continuing with that now in her PhD. So Shelley, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, yes. So here are some results from the 2021 survey of farmer mental health in Canada. And we saw about 1 in 5 farmers who participated were classified as having moderate to severe anxiety disorders or depressive disorders within the survey. And these were significantly higher than the general population of Canada at the same time. 3/4 of farmers were classified as experiencing moderate or high perceived stress. And surprisingly, approximately 83% of farmers had lower resilience scores than the US general population. And when we think of farmers, we always think of ourselves as being resilient and steadfast. So this was surprising to us. And then suicide ideation was double as high in farmers than in the general population. And 1/4 of Canadian farmers felt their life was not worth living, wished they were dead, or thought of taking their own life in the last 12 months. And then also, farmers had significantly higher scores on all 3 subscales of the mass/burnout inventory compared to population norms. And 2 of those 3 subscales are high exhaustion and cynicism, which are 2 of the 3 components of burnout. Back to Andria.
All right. And so with more rapid climate change, so recognizing that Canadian farmers presently are scoring in less advantageous mental health outcomes compared to general populations, what does that mean in terms of sustainable agriculture in the face of climate change? And so the question then becomes, is there a farmer mental health boundary that we are at risk of crossing? So with more rapid climate change, we're likely to see further threats to farmers and their well-being, right? So with even greater uncertainty, we're likely to see increased amounts of stress or anxiety, possibly trauma, and things like post-traumatic stress disorder, especially with those extreme weather events like we've seen with the wildfires, floods, and droughts, right? And can that continue on to become a situation where we see burnout and possibly attrition, loss to farming, people giving up their farms? Could this result in exacerbated feelings of isolation? What about the generational pressures and the threats of loss to farm, right? And does that come with a threat to identity, a threat of loss of farm legacy? I know in some of the work that we've done with Dr. Brianna Hagan, now at the Canadian Centre for Agriculture agricultural well-being. We've seen with that loss of legacy and being the generation that loses the farm, there's a lot of shame and guilt that might be associated with that as well. And so how can we reasonably expect farmers to be adaptive if we don't do more to help with their mental health and well-being so that they can be in a place where they're able to adapt, right? And they're able to take care of the land and their animals, not to mention themselves and their families. So where will agriculture, food production, food security, and food sovereignty lie in the face of those multitude of challenges? And so I know those are really stark questions to ask, and it's not Shelley and it's not our intention to be here today to scare anyone, because again, more good news. It is not too late for us to act. We have the collective knowledge, we have the technology, we have the creativity to address these challenges. And there are many, many great opportunities that we have where we can use to address the threats that we're facing. So next slide, please. And so with adaptation in agriculture, there's already a lot of different practices and technologies that can be used and are being used in some instances to make our land more resilient to extreme climate changes, to reduce the use of fossil fuels and inputs like diesel and fertilizers, and pest control. I know we've heard from a lot of farm families that they've had to use more pesticides because of those invasive species, for example. There's technology we can use to build soil health, to help sequester carbon, to help increase organic matter, and to reduce the energy and water use associated with agriculture. And so perhaps you or farmers that you work with are already using some of these adaptations. So no-till and cover crops. So almost moving back to former ways of knowing and operating in agriculture, and using no-till and cover crops to help reduce soil erosion and help promote soil fertility, for example, and nutrient cycling, high-yielding crop genetics. We're seeing a proliferation of digital and precision farming tools. So things like the use of drones, right, for monitoring and for planting, or in-field sensors to monitor plant health and detect threats early, so that changes can be made early on. Precision irrigation systems are another, and digital farming platforms and data analyses and use of artificial intelligence. Like there's so much being developed so much technology that is being developed that will allow farmers to farm with fewer expenditures. But again, the question is, are farmers ready to adapt to some of these approaches, right? What are the barriers to their uptake? These are not perfect solutions, and there's likely to be a lot of barriers that we need to discuss and be able to overcome. And so what can we do to help address them? And that's just the stuff that like current humans are thinking about. Then there's also the stuff to look for in the future. And so what technologies and changes will be developed as more natural ecosystem services are threatened and or collapse. And there's a whole field of research that explores technological replacements to natural ecosystem services that could also offer brand new solutions as well. Next slide, please.
I think now it's my part.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So as Andrea has outlined, climate crises present many challenges to farming, farmers' mental health, and the resilience of Canadian agriculture. These natural hazards and catastrophes that farmers in Canada are experiencing and anticipating add to the significant daily stressors that farmers face. But we don't know what risk management and mental health resources that farmers need and would use that could help improve resilience when facing catastrophic losses related to climate change. So this leads to our current project to address this gap. So last spring, we interviewed 36 farmers in Ontario who had recently experienced a loss of livestock to an extreme weather event like drought or a barn collapse during a storm. And the objectives of this project are to understand the impacts of climate change on farmers' mental health, individual, social, and environmental factors that are important to the capacity of farmers and farm communities to adapt to crises associated with climate change, and what supports would help with coping and proactive adaptation to climate crises. So following, I will present some examples the interview participants gave of emotional impacts of these events, what helped them get through these events, and how these events changed the way they now farm. Before we get into the results of the study, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my positionality within this research and why it's so important to me. So I'm a 7th generation farmer in Rockton, Ontario. My dad and I have had broiler chickens up until 3 weeks ago when my barn roof collapsed. I think this is a video. Yes, here you can see. When my barn roof collapsed during a snowstorm, the most snow my area has seen in years. Luckily, the roof collapsed just hours after we had shipped chickens, so no one got hurt. But yes, so this study is very close to my heart. So now I'll share, here we go. I'll share some quotes from the participants in this study, and this research has yet to be published, so we ask of you please to not screenshot or share any of the upcoming quotes. So might get a little motion sickness from this slide, but on the screen you can see 2 videos taken of the same land during the drought on the left and then on an average year on the right to show the severity of this event. And while you're watching, I'll read one participant's account of this event. So we had a later spring, like what we'd say cooler later spring, and then things perked up and we had some growth and we got hit with a really hard killing frost. And if we would have got a rain after that late killing frost, I don't think things would have been that extreme. But we had this late killing frost and then we never got rain, never got rain, and never got rain. And so we were all commenting on, gee, it's sure dry. But honestly, even still by the middle of June, it was really dry here and we had little growth. But I think we still thought it was going to rain because it's this place and it's going to rain. But it never rained and we were getting to the end of July. And I was honestly going, oh my God, what am I going to do here? I'm almost out of pasture. Normally I'd be grazing until November. And I think the cows, honestly, I really think the cows were confused as much as we were because I think they were like, what's going on, you know? So then usually we start making hay by the end of June and there was nothing there and we were so dry. We also ended up having huge grasshoppers and so had grasshopper issues, even though there was very little growth. The growth there, the grasshoppers were just swarming. It was awful. Okay, and here you can see multiple barns that were destroyed during a possible tornado in Ontario. And in this case, only these barns were impacted by the storm. No other neighboring farms or properties had any damage. So while you're watching, I'll read an example of one participant describing their barn collapsing. We had a big storm, like we were out of power for 8 days. When this barn went over, it was full. I had 50-week-old breeders in it. So when I called whoever I could. It was a Saturday of a long weekend. Okay, no one's around. So I'm calling, and I finally get a hold of my vet. And he's like, I'm on my way. He's at his cottage or whatever. He's on his way. Although these experiences are quite different, one gradual and the other immediate, there are similarities in the impacts that these events had on farmers, their families, and production. So I'm going to give some examples of these impacts, but this is not an exhaustive list. And again, this data has not been fully analyzed yet, so just preliminary results. Okay. Farmers talked about strong emotional impacts from the events like desperation, hopelessness, grief, and frustration. One farmer explained, it felt like mental torture. I remember you're literally looking at the clouds and you're like, there's water up there. Like, for God's sake, just rain. That's all you have to do. They also described impacts on their relationships with their families that they work with. This farmer said, you toss and turn all night long, and then you look at each other and you're snipping at each other because you don't know where to go next. Farmers described physical impacts of the stress from the experience, saying, "You don't feel like eating and you can't sleep. Our heads were spinning, like my blood pressure went through the roof. I just started spinning and spinning. It was like mind-boggling. Too many things to think about with the new barn all at once." Participants talked about not having enough time to do everything that needed to be done to recover from the event, but also having too much free time during recovery when farming stopped. For example, this farmer said, "The first little while we would sit. Normally we look at 4 o'clock, I've got to go do chores. Well, now what? It's too early to have supper. So you sit in front of a TV and like, I don't want to do this. We have 40 chickens in a coop in the barn. So I get up, I go do chickens, spend some time up there, and okay, now I'm done. Now what? I've been doing chores all my life. Like before I went to school, I used to have to go to the barn and milk cows and stuff. So that's literally all my life." Many farmers talked about the impact the event had on their responsibility to care for their animals, and this is when many farmers got choked up in their interviews. This participant explained, "And then it's also like those cows to me. I really love my cows, and they count on you. They take me for granted because they just know that I'm going to feed them. They never complain. Maybe if they don't like the bale of hay, they might make a fuss, but I mean, they count on you, right?" And that made me sad. It made me sad to think, oh my God, guys, I don't know what to do here. People saw long-term impacts of these events on their productivity. Like this farmer said, and there's been a whole bunch of fertility issues and stuff showing up in these beef herds. And it started with the drought. We developed some foot problems in some of our animals. So these kind of ramifications kind of lasted for a few years. They also experienced long-term stress following the event, as this person explained. Yeah, and even the stress that you get from it, like I'm still feeling it to this day because now, yeah, every spring I get, like I was saying, that sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach and everything's probably fine, but you still like forever kind of burnt by that. And maybe it'll go away over time, but for now it still seems pretty fresh. And this was a couple of years after event. Financially, these events are extremely difficult for many farmers. This farmer explained, "I spent close to 250,000 more in feed just to feed 120 less head than I usually feed." And many folks who kept farming following the event talked about how their farm would not be able to financially withstand another crisis like this, which is concerning when we think about increasing unpredictable extreme weather events. One participant said, "I think personally we put out between 60,000 and 70,000 to buy hay." Well, you can't do that. We cleaned out our savings to do that, right? And you only have that option once. And then the next time, there's just not the money to do it. Farmers talked about feeling overwhelmed with the amount of decisions that needed to be made during these events, and also the gravity of these decisions on the future of their farms. This farmer said, "Some people had cattle leave the district to be fed, and people were calling, offering to buy cattle. And I mean, even as far as the East Coast, people were saying, we could bring some of your cattle up here." But to be honest, that was overwhelming to people too. Like you have these pregnant cows, and then what do? Ship them out and then try to get them back again before they calve? It was fairly overwhelming. It's not like moving 10 cows. We're talking big numbers with these big guys. And notably, these decisions became more difficult when a whole family and future generations are relying on the outcome of the decisions. As this participant said, thinking about the next step is the hardest thing, but you don't know it. And you've got to think about it from the whole perspective, like basically your family's perspective, right? Because it's not just solely one individual's decision. Again, decisions made during these times impact generations to come, and many participants discuss considering leaving farming because of the event. This farmer explained, "Since the drought, people aren't reinvesting. I mean, the transfer of knowledge, the transfer of even the assets now becomes more and more difficult. Lots of people got out of farming or sold the majority of their animals and then just didn't get back in." And multiple farmers expressed similar sentiments to this. "Next drought, I'm out." So that was a lot of information and heavy quotes. So maybe let's take a minute to discuss some of these impacts. And you can write in the chat or turn your camera and mic on and talk about maybe if any of these impacts surprised you.
we're leaving everyone's mic and camera off, but
Okay.
please pop it in the chat if that would be wonderful. Thanks, everybody.
While we're waiting for people to put in the chat, for me, the one that surprised me the most was the free time. And that's something I'd never thought about before, how stressful it can be out of your routine. And having all that free time. I would think there'd be a million things to do when something like this happens, but not having anything to do can also be very stressful.
I think that was for me too, Rochelle. When you talked to Rochelle, you talked about, I've got 40 chickens, so I went out to the chickens, and then what do? I don't want to watch TV, and almost like a loss of purpose.
Yeah.
A loss of self, a loss of, that identity. And like, I can really understand that, but it's extraordinarily sad.
Mm.
Have you noticed that, Shelley, now in your unfortunate situation as a farmer where you presently don't have any birds?
Luckily we went on vacation pretty much immediately after that happened. We went on a family vacation, so we had some time together to talk about things, and we weren't there sitting with it for that long. And we were doing things like decision making about the future and everything on vacation and not like looking at the barn. So that was really helpful, definitely to us. But I think now that we're back, it'll be more hit us more probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would encourage anyone to pop anything in the chat regarding that. Oh, I think we might have a chat here.
Abigail's comment resonates with me as well. Ever since I first started working with farmers in a mental health capacity, I'm a veterinarian, so the connection with their animals didn't surprise me. But when I see anti-agriculture sentiments, animal activist statements or comments about, farmers don't care about their animals, like they're sending them for food, so they can't possibly care about their animals, right? And just how wrong that is, and the connection that so many farmers have with their animals, and then feeling like you've let them down, like that story in this instance that Shelley shared today about, like, yeah, I can't imagine going out and looking at your herd and saying, I don't have food for you, and I don't know how I'm going to get that. Like that would be really tough. And then the stress and the finance of needing to find food and bring it in, like with the Hay West movement, for example. I think that's something that we, probably haven't talked about a lot prior.
Catherine Miller-Mort says, I am struck by the generational impact and the weight those decisions have on folks.
Yeah, so there is a really strong sense, some of Brianna Hagen's PhD work looked at that, a strong sense of obligation, right? If we look at Shelley, like she's 7th generation farmer, right? And like that farm started in the early 1800s, you said, right, Shelley? I think that math works. Yeah, like that's a lot to keep up. And not that farming has ever been easy, but it sure does feel like the variation in stressors that farmers are facing now, and the speed with which things are changing, and the uncertainty, as Shelley's work has shown, I can handle this problem, and I can handle this problem, and I can handle this problem. But when all of those problems come at once, that becomes a lot. And then, do you feel like you're the one letting the family down, right? Like the legacy down.
Yeah, absolutely. And personally, like our family farm was founded in 1905, the same year Saskatchewan became a province. And that's a conversation that's happening in our family, right? Is what's going to happen. We don't know. And all those stressors really impact that.
Yeah.
So another comment from Kevin was, the stress farmers endure and how many variables can affect you and your farm's profits. I'm not sure. C. Denard says, sorry, my thing keeps going.
I'd be
Courtney.
Courtney.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Courtney. I appreciate that. As a dairy farmer, there isn't a long stretch to do dry hay in our area anymore. So now we do hay in a day, which is exhausting, and stress can lead to farm accidents from
Yes.
rushing or operating heavy machinery when tired. And that's absolutely something we talk about, Courtney. And thank you for bringing that up.
Mm-hmm.
We know mental health affects physical health, and rushing and complacency, sleep, nutrition, proper hydration, all of those things can lead us to making errors that we might not normally make, that can lead us to physically endangering ourselves or someone else.
Yeah, it's always those split second things, right? I'll just do it this once, and then that's the one time, right?
I have a question here. Are you looking at whether impacts are different or more or less intense on different communities? For example, different impacts on women, racialized groups, Indigenous communities, young versus older farmers, etc.
That's a great question. Thank you for raising that. And it allows me to do a little plug and ask for your help. So we are starting up a series of studies looking at climate, farmer mental health in equity deserving groups. So we have some studies starting with Black farmers in Canada, LGBTQ farmers in Canada, and then our work to date has often relied on membership to commodities and a reliance on online recruitment methods or online surveys. So a third group we're looking at is Mennonite, Amish, Hutterite farmers. So we will be starting a study on this very soon to see how membership to those different communities impacts the stressors that they may experience, their ability to seek help, their experience with the help that's provided, for example. And as you state there, that if the impacts are different. So yeah, if you know and or are and or have access to farmers from Black, LGBTQ, or Mennonite, Hutterite, Amish groups, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat. And because I think it's really important, I want to point out that the interviewers that we have leading those different studies are all members of those communities themselves. So we do have a wonderful Black scholar who will be leading, for example, the Black interviews. So we have in-group interviewers there. So I'll add my email to the chat. Sorry for
Perfect.
that shameless plug, Robin.
No, please plug away. This is why we do these things, to make those connections, act as a hub, create synergies, and hopefully do really good work to improve the lives and of our farmers and our communities. That's why we do these things. So plug away. I did miss this one from Chad. I wonder about farmers who are isolated and experience some of these severe impacts. Has your research indicated any farmers' experiences who may be less isolated?
Yeah, I can say that the number one thing that people were talking about, factor that helped them through these situations, was being able to connect with other people in their community or other people who had gone through a similar event, and feeling like they weren't alone in it, and being able to talk to other people. So being isolated is definitely, yeah, would be hard on someone, more difficult than being in a community going through an event. But yeah.
And you think about that, right, when something happens in a community, and it can be a really great thing, right? We're fundraising for a new fire truck. So the whole community comes together and they have a barbecue, and the kids have bouncy castles, and it's a great time for everybody to get together and talk to each other and support each other. So that idea of working towards less isolation, that we aren't just silos. Humans just don't live in caves and by ourselves anymore. That's not how we work, and they never did. We never did live like that, right? So that idea that shared experience and togetherness can really help bolster our mental health, and bolster how we respond to extreme events and bad markets and unknown and unprecedented times. I think is really interesting. Shelley, thank you for that. From Susie, we farm with my in-laws. Since we moved up here 4 years ago, we have been living in a drought situation, which has increasingly been getting worse. Thinking of weather events and always hoping for even a full day of rain is part of our everyday focus. Having always a surplus of bales and even selling them has been a transition to searching for and buying hay. We know the land mass to support our herd on a normal, even slightly drought year, yet we've been reducing our herd size, not knowing what the following year will bring.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is so hard, especially like the farmers that I talked to that had gone through the drought. It was like a 1 year event, extreme drought, but when it's prolonged over many years and you don't know what's going to happen next, I can imagine that that's very difficult.
Yeah. And I mean, that speaks to so many different themes, right? Like you see the uncertainty there, you're not knowing what's it going to be like. We're seeing a scaling back of farm size, right? The number of cattle. In some of the other research interviews that Shelley has done, we've heard people leave farming. And so then again, like that's so important for those individuals themselves and the farming community that they live in. And then of course also has broader downstream effects like food security and sovereignty, right? And Canada's economy is so reliant, hugely reliant on Canadian agriculture, that we see again an even bigger downstream effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Victoria makes a comment that I don't know if any of us could comment on. Is it's a tax burden question? Is a tax burden comment is that farmers say frequently that they only work to pay taxes, and this can make them, very upset. And I mean, financial stressors are a huge part of that stress component of farming, right? Like that definitely is something that can be stressful, regardless of what those financial stresses are.
Yes.
Yes.
Through the comment from Miranda, yes, please do not share the quotes at this time. Yeah, as Andrea said.
Sorry, I was already typing it, Shelley. Sorry. Yeah, Miranda, we'd be happy to chat with you and get you what you need for your article. We're also just trying to protect the data before we publish it too. So, but we can certainly work with you.
Perfect. Yeah, Miranda, if you please contact Andrea and Shelley and get that worked out. If anybody else has any questions, please pop them in the chat. We're really lucky to have some time with Shelley and Andrea. So
I can move on if
yes, please
okay.
do. Yes,
Yeah.
We'll let you do that. Thank you.
That's all good. Yeah, so now I'd like to talk about, again, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat and we'll address them at the end. But right now I'd like to talk about some practical examples of what participants said helped them during these events. So first, people really praise their communities, as we just discussed, for coming together during these times. And starting at the top, this farmer said, we're reaching out to say, if you have any land at all that we could put a fence on, because there's lots of landowners with no livestock, and people are actually phoning us and saying, I've got a chunk of property that might be able to take a few cows. And working with other farmers, the crops that year, like the corn and stuff like that, some corn got destroyed by the frost, some recovered well, so there was some decent crop. So then we thought, well, let's try to partner with our crop friends, and we did. And there was some good that came out. People bailed up things like corn stalks, stuff we've never done in that community. And then on the barn clap side, so I have a couple of neighbors around that were chicken farmers, obviously, that came over and helped us. And he was talking about culling chickens there, but didn't want to go into detail on that. And then the next thing that helped was diversification. Those who experienced barn collapse but had another source of income talked about benefiting from that. And folks also further diversified following an event like drought to mitigate future risk. One participant said more diversity in the crops that people are growing, that they're trying to get some things growing that maybe don't need as much moisture, are a little more hardy, or a little bit different nutrients based. And I mean, yes, the rains and the scorching event, it killed our grass. I was lucky enough, I had oats and I had corn in, so corn can withstand a lot more. That's the reason I'd went into these things, to mitigate some of the extreme weather. Participants advised others to downsize during drought and change their mindset towards farming to downsize following drought. For example, it absolutely changed the way I think about farming. Absolutely. Like before, I wanted to have every possible cow that we could support. And now I more think like, okay, how many can we support for when it turns dry in late summer? If you can get by, if you've got some cows that may be kind of on the fringe, you're thinking about getting rid of them, sell them, pocket that money right now. If you have cows that you think might not be bred or whatever, get them checked. If they're not, get them the heck out of there. And then finally, participants talked about appreciating the support they received during the event and the availability of people in the industry like vets, commodity organization reps, and feed reps during this time. So they said it was a Saturday of a long weekend. Okay, no one's around. I'm calling and calling. Finally, I get a hold of my vet and he's like, I'm on my way. He's at his cottage or whatever, but he's on his way. Because it was absolutely amazing the help we got. And even the quick, especially when Beef Farmers of Ontario took over that hay thing, that happened really quick, and it was a big job for BFO too. They had to dedicate staff off of regular files just to concentrate on frigging dealing hay and finding hay. So that's a huge job for them too. And then farmers also talked about what could have been helpful but wasn't available to them during an event like this. They explained that funding for risk management equipment like cisterns and generators was available following the event or during the event, but they were too busy at that time to apply for incentives. They wished incentives were available prior to a crisis instead of when it happened. This participant explained, yeah, like if we could kind of buy bigger tanks or put in a cistern or something to store water in the event of something like that. We haven't done any of that just because projects like that are so expensive and everything is so expensive right now. But no, truthfully, we haven't really done anything to prepare. I think just because anything that you could do would be so expensive or such a group effort. And then farmers talked about not knowing where to look to apply for grants or funding or recovery resources, or to look for support resources. This farmer said, "We've tried looking, but you keep coming to dead-end walls. I'm not great with computers. My daughter-in-law has been looking, but she usually runs out of time before she can get anywhere on them." But yeah, so that's my biggest complaint, that there's nothing, that you can't just go onto a website and here's your farmers, especially for a disaster. When something goes wrong, there should be more help available to farmers. And finally, actually, this suggestion came up a couple of times, and it was for increased community gatherings when an event like this happens that impacts a whole community or a commodity, which we just talked about. So that's great. This farmer explained, honestly, it would have been really nice if the county or if one of our ag organizations could have even said, let's have a get together and we can all talk about how this is affecting us and how we're getting through it and strategies. And even just a social outing, just to kind of vent your frustration and kind of laugh it off with other people. And then finally, folks suggested more permanent mutual aid infrastructure. So this participant explained, when we'd have a good year here and Western Ontario had a poor year, I've always thought that because of that yin and yang, we're perfectly set up to support one another. That is something, and I would, honest to God, in a year where we had lots, I would be the first one to load up some bales to go to help if we could get the same support. That's something I wish to God we could organize something like that. And again, these are just some of the many suggestions people made in interviews. So I'm wondering if any of these suggestions stuck out to you as being great or problematic, or if you have other suggestions that we haven't included here.
And once again, just pop that in the chat, folks. It was interesting to me to talk about that, almost that hub of help, right? Where can I go? Like, especially, farmers are, so multi-talented, and they do so much. They're business people, and they're animal husbandry, and they're crop scientists, and they do all of these jobs. And then on top of that, we often anticipate and expect them to be able to, be a bureaucrat, right? And being able to wade through a lot of, that information out there. There are are a lot of amazing programs out there and a lot of information, but it can be awfully difficult to find if you don't know where to look, and awfully inaccessible if it's not written in plain language. So to me, that really struck me personally as something that, as organizations, that we could definitely start thinking about, in a different manner, and how do we make that accessible and easier for folks to access, especially when they're in a crisis situation, and coming off that, that extreme emotional event, and being able to just access something that's easy to read and easy to understand. So that was interesting to me.
Yeah, my dad, when our barn collapsed, he was expecting that insurance would know what to do and would tell him the next steps. So when insurance came out and said we weren't covered at all for it, then he was like, "What do I do? What do I do?" And he was like asking them like, "What's the next step? What do I need to know? Like, what do I need to do?" So we ended up talking to our feed rep, and they give us a lot of really helpful information, but definitely like what needs to be done today, the day of, and then what needs to be done a month from now, and what's really important right now. Those things would be helpful.
And Shelley, it's interesting you say your feed rep. We've done surveys with farmers that talk about, where do you want to get your safety information for? Who do you have a real connection with? And they often say they're suppliers, right? They're seed reps, they're equipment, the guys that come to fix their equipment, those folks, right? And isn't that an interesting conversation to have about, that relationship that folks have with their suppliers, and how they're able to support their customers, their farmers, right, in their well-being and in moving forward, in case of an event like a barn collapse. That's pretty interesting, Shelley.
Yeah, yeah, she was super helpful. Yeah.
So if you would like to go on, we can move on, and we will,
Okay.
that'd be great.
Okay. Now, one thing that people said did not help, that was surprising to me, was that farmers said that they didn't have or didn't use a formal emergency plan in these situations. And multiple people explained that an emergency plan wouldn't have helped them because there is no way to plan for this level of crisis. And this participant said, I had a couple people say, well, don't you have a drought management plan? You should this and you should this. And people said, oh, you should always have another year's supply of hay ahead of time and all this. With the amount of land that you carry, you kind of carry that land knowing that you can feed your cows. I'm sure most of us have some hay reserves, but probably not a year, right? That kind of upset me a little bit. It starts messing with you. It does mess with you. And I think, again, you think maybe I'm just a bad farmer. Maybe my land is poor. All the things you start questioning, right? Another farmer said it's kind of hard to plan. I guess if more of something like that happens, there's not much you can do in the moment. So again, last discussion question. I'm wondering from your experience, do the farmers you know or work with use formal emergency plans? And I can say that we did not use a formal emergency plan when our barn collapsed. And I don't know many people who have a formal emergency plan or one that's up to date. So yeah, I'm wondering if we can hear your perspectives on that.
We do have a comment here from Dell. When it seems so bleak, like facing a firing squad as the commodity one is in, it is literally turned off because it was financially unviable, supported by a government support. The Nova Scotia hog industry, buyouts, bankruptcies, you name it, it was there. People left the industry. There was no choice. And how to change this, I don't know. How does one support a number of years of losses? As following farmers simply disappeared, the fallout is incredible.
Yeah. How does like prolonged events, multiple events, how does that impact the sustainability of farming in general, farming in these communities or overall? Yeah.
Yeah, year after year of sustained loss. It's really hard to continue. It's and no one, and you know what? It's not, you're not a failure, right? Like, I think that's something that sometimes we forget to mention, that you're not a failure. The we've failed you. Society has failed you. We have that I think from my perspective, I don't know if that's right, but from my perspective, that's what it feels like, that, our farmers haven't failed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Robin, because lots of people brought that up, like feeling like failure, feeling like a bad farmer. It's their responsibility, and this freak event happened, but they still took ownership for the event and responsibility for the impact. So yeah, that's great to reiterate.
I would encourage everyone to
Oh.
have a formal emergency plan.
Yeah.
CASA does have, it's a small one. It's not very complicated. It's not very long, and you can check that out on the AgSafe 2 Week website, just to even get something written down, right? Who to call, what to do, immediately. And not only does CASA have them, but local organizations like Farm Safety Nova Scotia, AgSafe BC, AgSafe Alberta, the Manitoba Farm Safety Program through CAP, they all have plans and help there. So pick up the phone, call CASA. We'll connect you with your local folks. There are people out there that are willing to help you with these things, and help you understand them, and make them adaptable for your operation, because we understand that all operations are very unique. They're not no, there's not one operation that is the same as each other. So, we encourage that so much, just to mitigate your loss, and quite frankly, protect the most important asset on your farm, which is the people, each and every one of you.
Yeah.
Um,
I was going to add, Robin, that the shame piece is likely mediated or strongly related to identity, right? And farmer identity. Dr. Rebecca Perk-Stevenson out of the University of Alberta is leading a study, and we are looking at farmer identities and sort of connections with mental health. So that's something. And then I also wanted to mention the Canadian Centre for Agricultural Wellbeing has a number of emergency toolkits. So there's a couple already, and I know that they are being developed as well. So if you don't already follow ccaw.ca, that would be a great thing to follow and share. Oh, I see Chad actually just said the same thing. So yeah, so Chad's comment, not shameless, but a plug for my organization. We're continuing to work on developing effective, supportive response plans that farmers, producers, and supportive professionals can use to support people in these types of crises. So yeah, thanks for
and it's incredible. And we've done a story on that. And so you can check it out on our website too, and link over to CCAW, but they've done an incredible job. So we are so excited that they've taken that on.
Awesome.
Courtney had mentioned we have a standard operating procedure on our dairy farm that is required for our audits. It lists all of our stakeholders and support team, but it doesn't really outline what to do in an emergency. I used it one time when our blood flooded and I was home alone to call people to help me. It's a start, Courtney. Good for you. It's small steps. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So, now you know what you need in that plan, and now you can action that. So that's incredible. Good job. That's fantastic. Abby says, my father, an egg farmer, has an emergency plan based on issues that have happened in the past. So power outages and high heat, winter, etc. But I think that as we continue to see the effects of climate change and the environmental impact, that his plan will become outdated far sooner than it has in the past.
Mm-hmm. And we used to have like a binder, like a thick binder that we'd have our emergency plans in, and now things need to be updated. You have a binder every few months, every year, or whatever. So yeah, now it'll be more digital, and there should be a way to update your plans constantly.
Yeah, and keeping them lean, right? And understanding what you need and what you don't need. Because sometimes that is onerous, right? When someone sees, oh my goodness, like we've heard this conversation before, we can't a farm safe plan. Well, this will take me hours and hours, and and that's fair, right? And that's an absolutely fair criticism, because from our perspective as a safety organization, we don't want to put any more onerous on you. We don't want to cause you stress to be safe. We want things to be easier. So that's on us, to make sure that those things, those tools, those resources are more streamlined, easier to use, more accessible, easy to read. If you need to cross out a section because it doesn't apply to you, right? Those sorts of things. So that's extraordinarily good feedback, that we all need to take back as organizations that are supporting farmers in order to be more responsive to their needs as we move forward. That's great.
I wonder if I could ask what people's experience has been either with climate change, if you're a farmer, or working with farmers. Like how is climate change or extreme weather, if that wording is preferred, how is that being discussed in your circles, like experienced and or discussed in your circles? Just curious.
Please pop it in the chat, folks, if you have any feedback on that question.
Yeah, I've been scrolling through the chat, trying to listen and read at the same time. There's a lot of really great comments in there, folks. So thank you so much for sharing.
Very engaging. I appreciate that very much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Shelley, I'll let you continue.
Okay. Okay, so now to end on something positive that came from these events. Many farmers in the community that experienced the extreme drought talked about the resilience of their community and how their community banded together during the drought and how this has had a lasting positive impact on their community. So I wanted to share this quote from one of the farmers. Men were crying, like men had tears in their eyes because they thought they were going to have to get rid of most of their cattle. And I think when people were so open like that, I think we all just feel there was a different tightness. And I think we all know to watch out for our fellow guys now when things are happening. So yeah, I think we've all changed, but I do think that I feel that we're all more open. I feel like we've changed in sharing information because we all struggled together. It wasn't just a couple farms that were dealing with, say, scours or something. We were all in this together. So I feel like we are all way more open. I really do. And so then I want to talk about the next steps for this project. So we held a think tank in January and discussed a bunch of results from this project and next steps moving forward, and developed a supports map of existing supports that exist and communication between different groups that we are continuing to develop. And then we are hoping to analyze these interview data for resilience factors and for opportunities for greater supports across agriculture and maybe larger supports like Hay West, permanent infrastructure for those kind of things. And then Andrea has a couple of projects coming up that maybe she wants to plug.
Yeah, so one is called Manufactured Ecosystems. If you're interested in looking at that, it's manufacturedecosystems.com is the website for that. So that's being led by a colleague here, Dr. Shoshana Jacobs, and there's a lot of different pieces within that. And we are just waiting to hear about funding to see if we are able to add on to that project a Canadian farmer perspective. And the idea is looking at how technologies can be used to enhance and or if we get to the point where we need to replace natural ecosystem services, what farmers' ideas, thoughts, perspectives, experiences, insights would be for that. So one example that we use commonly is with the massive decline in bee numbers. What would have happened if we had lost the bees and no longer had, for example, bees as pollinators? And so Harvard, I think it was Harvard. I should look that up. I'm not sure. Was it Harvard, Shelley?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
made robo bees. So they're robotic bees that can serve the purpose of cross-pollinating crops, right? So not saying we want the bees to decline. I personally want the natural bees. However, if things got to a point where they did decline, could technology be used as sort of a replacement or again, enhancing? So that would be an example of a technological replacement of manufactured ecosystems. So hopefully we find out in early April if we'll have money to extend the study to include Canadian farmers and looking at technological replacements. How can we optimize those? Again, if push came to shove and we needed to, right? Kind of under the being prepared umbrella. And then the other study that is starting is the one that I mentioned with Black LGBTQ plus and Anabaptist groups, so Mennonite, Hutterite, Amish, etc. So yeah, again, I'll repost it in case it's got lost in all of our awesome discussion in the chat. But if you are a farmer from one of those communities, or or are able to help recruit from those communities, please feel free to give me an email, and we'd be happy to work with you and have your support. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, thank you for listening and participating in the chat. That was awesome. And if you would like to follow along with this research, please visit our website or follow us on Instagram. And you can always reach us at these emails here on the screen. So yeah, if there's any more questions, we'd be happy to answer them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shelley and Andrea. That's I've heard this presentation or versions of it a couple times, and every time I learn something new and I get something new out of it. So I appreciate that, and thank you so much. I know your time is very precious, both of you, and we are just so blessed that you were able to make the time for us during this Canadian Agricultural Safety Week to come and talk to our participants about climate change and the impact on the mental health of farmers. We just really appreciate you both.
Well, Mutual Adoration Society, because CASA is fantastic. And thank you for hosting workshops like these. I know you host many. Yeah, you do so much for the agricultural community. So yeah, thank you back for having us.
Oh, thanks. That's so nice.
So
that's
Canadian.
wonderful.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
No,
and
thank
thank
you.
all the participants. Thank you guys for showing
Yes.
up. But also, thank you. If we don't have any more questions or anything, I will do a bit of a shameless plug on Cass's part. We all will be doing our next forum in May in celebration of Kids Farm Safe Week. And we'll be having Elma Jordan from Ireland coming to talk about farm safety for kids and how it is awfully applicable there and here, and talk about what they're doing in Ireland to keep kids safe on the farm. So watch for that in your inboxes. We'll be sending out links up on that as well. And we just want to say thank you once again to everybody. And thank you for the wonderful accolades in the chat. I think you're right, Andrea and Shelley. Shelley is sharing this important information. And please feel free to contact them or contact us if you have any questions.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. All right, we'll let you go and have a great rest of your day.